It's time for another episode of Nick's Nerd Network. We're going to be continuing our series on racism with John Branthman, and this is going to be part 2. I am not a crook. And we are going to be discussing white privilege. Let's get started. So, can white people experience can white people experience racism towards themselves?
So I'm glad you asked that because we've all probably heard this phrase, reverse racism, which is the claim that white people are facing discrimination. People really love to use this phrase anytime people of color are criticizing anything unfair. And I think it's important to understand that when people of color say that they need to be treated as real people with equal opportunities, that does not mean that they're like hating white people, and white people should not experience those statements as attacks. And to answer your question, maybe in like some scenario it's possible, but I have never yet heard of such a scenario. And to get specific, when people talk about reverse racism, they're usually talking about affirmative action scholarships. Like the idea that if you are Black or Latino or Native American, there are certain scholarships you could apply to that white people couldn't. And I remember once I had, or a few times, I've had students say or write in class that they felt discriminated against as white people because they couldn't apply to these scholarships. And when you're thinking about these scholarships, it's so crucial to understand that whiteness functions as a kind of affirmative action through our whole lives. Like even before we're born, the histories that our families have had, the neighborhoods and land where they live, the healthcare and educational access they have while we're in utero, the neighborhoods we're born into and the schools we go to are all impacted by race in this country, which means that the whiter you are, the more likely it is that you've had these good opportunities. So affirmative action doesn't like give people of color an unfair advantage. It recognizes how often they have been disadvantaged and tries just a little bit to lessen that disadvantage. Another way to think of it is if you imagine like a race, if getting into college is a race, we're not all starting off on the same starting line. Because of our 18 plus years of different life experiences that have a lot to do with racism, very often if you're white, and especially if you're white and middle class, you have an advantage. Your whole education and your personal and professional networks have prepared you for this really well. And so you're actually closer to that goal of getting into a good college. And what affirmative action scholarships do are recognize that a lot of people have faced a lot of setbacks in their lives, and these scholarships hope to diminish those setbacks just a little bit to give them more of a fair shot in this race.
And I'm going to link in the video description down below a link to a video that I think is a really powerful visual representation of these kind of advantages, where they have people from all over setting up for a race. They're all starting on the starting line, and they start asking questions like, if this applies to you, take a step forward. If this applies to you, take a step forward. And they start seeing that these step forwards are these advantages. It's a representation of that advantage, and they're understanding how people are being set back while other people have an advantage, and it might be easier for those people to get to the goal than those other people who don't have those same advantages.
Definitely.
So there's a word for these kinds of advantages, and it's called privilege. So tell us a little bit about like privilege itself.
So privilege is when something in your life is easier, or you face fewer obstacles or less violence because of some trait you have that you didn't choose. It could be your color, your sexual orientation. So if you're white, if you're straight, if you're able-bodied, if you're middle class, if you're born in America and speak with no accent, these kinds of things. And people often get really defensive when we talk about privilege. It's often easier for people to acknowledge discrimination than to acknowledge privilege, because it feels easier to acknowledge that bad things happen to other people than to acknowledge that maybe I myself have gotten where I am in life, not only because I'm great and worked hard, but because I also have received unearned advantages. So, for example, in my own experience, I have worked really hard in school my whole life, but also for reasons beyond my own control, I was working really hard in a great school district with like computers for every student, and always had food at home and had heat in the winter and air conditioning in the summer. So if you think of this like swimming a race, if my academic and professional life has been like swimming in a race, I was swimming with the current very often, whereas a lot of people could be swimming twice as hard but swimming against the current, and so like actually working just as hard or harder than me but not getting as far as I've gotten. So that's what privilege is. And I've sometimes heard people say that it's bad to talk about discrimination or privilege because it like makes people feel helpless. And I would say acknowledging problems does not create those problems. It helps us see what they are and do something about them.
So what is a way that, we talked about privilege earlier, what is a way that we, those of us who have that sort of privilege, I mean, you and I are both still part of a minority group in terms of being part of the LGBTQA community, but we still have a level of privilege being white males. How can we use our privilege to help other people?
Good question. So in my book, I talk about allyship, which is a really big idea in the field of like feminist and queer and anti-racist work. So being an ally means you use your privilege to help and support people who don't have that privilege. And that can take so many forms. It can mean, like you said, like recognizing to somebody, hey, are you okay? Like these things just happened in the news. You know, do you need support? It can also mean that when you hear other people say nasty stuff, you step in. So for example, if you are a white person and you hear other white people make a racist joke or say something really nasty, speak up. And often it feels awkward to do that, but you're in this position where those other white people might listen to you because you are also white. And so there's this, like you already have a foot in the door with them. And similarly for anything else, if you're a straight person and you, like definitely if you hear people use gay or fag as an insult, you should say something because not only might they listen to you more than they would listen to us, but also your physical safety is better. You are less likely to be attacked. Although, of course, you know, both for minorities of all types and for allies, if you are worried that speaking up will put you in physical danger, then you have to be very careful about that.
All right, well, that's really all we had for today. Thank you so much again for coming in, John. And if you haven't already, please check out his book. There's a link in the description to an interview about his book, You Be You. Please check it out. It's a great book and a great resource. And that's all for today's episode. Have a great night, guys. Bye. Hi, if you like this episode of Nick's Nerd Network, please like and subscribe or visit our new channel. And when you're on the new channel, check out my new banner. That was made by my friend Jesse. Please check out his website. He's really talented, and I'll leave the link in the description. He's great for all of your graphic design needs.